A proposal by presidential hopeful Andrew Yang that once seemed far-fetched appears to be picking up steam. According to a recent Hill-Harris-X poll, 49% of registered voters support universal basic income. That, by the way, is a 6-point spike from February to September.
Support for the freedom dividend is most popular amongst young people ages 18 to 34 and calls for $1,000 a month to be given to nearly every American adult. Joining us now via Skype to discuss why the proposed program appears to be gaining traction and its benefits, UBI advocate and editor of Basic Income Today, Scott Santens. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
People are going to be so excited about this segment.
Yeah,
I'm excited about the segment.
Scott, tell us a little bit about the rising popularity of UBI. You said you've been doing this now for quite a long time. Just take us a little bit through, I guess, the intellectual history and how long you've known Andrew Yang.
Yeah, so I got into this in 2013, and it was through the automation angle, and this was before the Oxford report came out back in late November 2013. So really when I got into it, it was because that no one was talking about automation and how important that this discussion is and what the solutions are going to be. So that's really what got me into it. And really that's for a lot of people what's driving this discussion, especially in the US. Around the world, there are other reasons to support this. Like Canada is more focused on poverty, economic insecurity, and these kinds of things. But say the Switzerland initiative also gave a big boost to the basic income movement. A lot of more people discovered what basic income is because of the fact that they voted on it.
That was really actually my first introduction to the idea of a basic income. But for people who don't know that history, talk about what Switzerland was voting on and why.
Yeah, so Switzerland was essentially, they were the first country to put this to a citizen referendum. And that's because they're one of the rare countries that actually has that ability where people can get enough signatures together and then vote on things. And then if the country passes it, then it needs to be implemented by the government. So this was put towards the people, and they said, okay, should everyone in Switzerland have a sufficient unconditional basic income to guarantee dignity, really? And that was put towards the people, and 23% of the country voted yes. And so people thought, oh, well, that's like kind of a loss for the movement, how big of a loss that was. But actually, I mean, that was a very big deal that about a quarter of a country voted yes on this idea that really hardly anyone was talking about around the world yet. And the fact is that they actually frequently vote on things multiple times. So you vote on it, say, even for women's suffrage, they voted on this and said no back in the day. And then 12 years later, they voted again. And they said, yeah, women should have the right to vote. So I think that we'll be seeing that again in Switzerland at some point.
That's interesting. Scott, one of the things that I hear from a lot of UBI advocates like yourself, Andrew, and Crystal and I have talked about this, is that the major benefit of UBI is like, oh, well, it will allow people to stay home. It will allow people to do X, Y, Z. I do wonder, though, those are all things that are totally achievable through the tax code. Why is it that UBI specifically is better than hashing this out in Congress and just putting it in our tax code?
Yeah, so UBI is part of the tax code. You could actually, you could see it as, say, a fully refundable tax credit. So essentially, if you're not earning enough to pay the full amount in taxes, then you'd be receiving $1,000 per month. And then if you're paying, say, $4,000 per month in taxes, then really that goes down to $3,000 per month because you're getting $1,000 back. The reason to actually do that way, to do it like a fully universal amount, is because of the many effects that emerge from the fact that you're talking about an unconditional amount that goes to everyone universally. So part of those effects, you're talking about a loss of stigma is a big one, but also you're talking about, say, the effects of conditionality. So if you're giving someone let's say a earned income tax credit, so this is a wage subsidy, and you're saying that if you work, then we're going to give you more money to top that up. Well, because there's essentially a work requirement to receive it, then employers know that you have to accept their job in order to get that income. So they can actually pass off a lot of their labor costs to the government because they know that people that the government will actually push people up because of that.
Right.
You don't see that same thing with a fully universal unconditional amount. And also when it comes to, say, welfare is essentially, say, paying people to do nothing, whereas basic income is paying people to do anything. So the nothing part is the incentive. You're saying that, okay, here's $1,000 per month, but you have to not work in order to receive it. If you do work, and let's say you accept a job of, say, $1,000 per month, then you lose the $1,000 you were getting, and now you're getting $1,000 in wages, but you're no better off financially speaking. So there's a certain amount of discouragement of work through that conditionality.
Scott, one of the fears from the left that I see and hear all the time is that this is basically a way to sort of stealthily cut the social safety net. That, there is a lot of times libertarians support the idea of UBI because you can get rid of a lot of the existing social safety net programs and just have this one straightforward lump sum payment that goes to everyone. What do you make of that critique?
Yeah, I think it's important to see UBI as an unconditional foundation, say a guarantee of economic protection that's beneath everyone. Now, once you have that foundation, then you certainly still need things on top of it. You don't want to only have a foundation and that's it, just like you don't want to have only a foundation beneath your house. You want to have a house on top of it. You got to build the walls, you got to have the roof and everything else. So you still need to have things like healthcare, essentially, so especially, but then you also need things like education, you have childcare, these kinds of programs make a lot of sense to have on top of it. And the fact is that if you have that unconditional amount underneath everybody, then let's say you're also spending less on healthcare because you have a healthier society, people are less stressed, they are requiring less care. And we actually saw that effect in one of the experiments in Manitoba in the 70s that had a saturation site where in Delphin, Manitoba, they essentially eliminated poverty for about 5 years, and hospitalization rates went down 8.5%. So you can see that if you have a healthier population, then your healthcare dollars will go further. And same thing with education. We know that so much of educational outcomes are related to the conditions of the household that the students are in. So if you can create a household where there's more time with the parents, there's more financial security, then those students actually do better in school. So again, this having the foundation actually makes those dollars go further. So we don't want to eliminate everything, but there are programs that no longer make sense, I think, on top of basic income. And those things are your very your assistance programs that are very cash similar or cash based. So things like food stamps, nutritional assistance, things like WIC and TANF is our cash welfare system that we have right now. And these programs, it's very problematic, the way that we go about them and the effects. So if you look at TANF is a program where you can have states, like I live in Louisiana, and if you look at 100 families living in poverty in Louisiana, only 4 families are receiving TANF assistance. And you see that across the country where there's a lot of variability in this, and you've had a lot of conditions that people apply to them. Right. And those conditions actually leave people worse off.
Well, I mean, Bill Clinton really basically ended welfare. He championed ending welfare as we know it. A lot of states have essentially completely crushed that program. But I think the point you make, too, that doesn't get made often enough is the level of shame and stigma having to go to a government agency every year or every month or when your situation changes and continue to prove to them that you are poor enough to merit this assistance is something that, that I think is worthy of considering in this whole debate. Scott, thank you so much. Yeah. Great to have your expertise. We're really glad to talk to you. Come back again.
Thank you, Scott.
Oh, yeah. I'd be happy to come back again.
Sounds good.
Great.
All right, we'll have more Rising after this.